Okay, folks, we're ready to get rolling with our first session, which is all about backyard food production. And a couple of days ago, we didn't think Nick Ferguson was coming. And then yesterday, we found out he could be here. So he's had a lot of time to prepare this talk, right? And this is the guy who knows the plants out of this topic. So I'm confident we'll have a lot of fun with Nick. And as a special add-on bonus, during Q&A, what he'd like to hear are specific questions that might come up in your mind as you go about your specific situation, and then he will answer it as if it's a mini consultation. So yeah, this is why we want to keep our questions to the point. So he's going to be doing a series of mini consultations. We'll try to get through as many of them as possible. With that, I want to introduce the man who founded Homegrown Liberty, who convinced me to buy the goats that are on my roof about every 3 days, Nick Ferguson.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. So I'm supposed to be talking about backyard food production. So I wanted to kind of hit on some of the most common oversights and errors, the things that people normally do that gets them into hot water. The biggest thing that I see people do is they get really enthusiastic, and then they get big plans, and then they bite off huge chunks of something that they don't have the time or the energy or the expertise to chew on yet. So, with backyard food production, if you already know all this stuff, I'm not talking to you. So, I'm going to be speaking specifically to the people who are brand new to gardening, they've never kept animals before, or they've just kind of maybe had some pet rabbits or something, and they're thinking, I'm gonna make 3,000 pounds of meat a year with my rabbitry, and I just had Flopsy as a kid, and that's my experience level. So that's kind of the experience level I'm talking about. We're gonna hit on some really cool tips and tricks that will be helpful to even experienced people. So. When you're looking at your backyard food production, and backyard, we're not just talking about quarter-acre lots here. This could be you are new to a homestead or a farmstead, you're new to a ranch, we could be talking about 1,600 acres. What I'm looking at are the principles and the techniques and the methods. We're thinking about site assessment. You want to think about the energy flow through your property, and I'm not talking like some woo-woo metaphysical, the spiritual energy of it, We're talking about the actual energies that are coming into your property in the form of kinetic energy from wind. We're bringing in components like dust. It's coming on your property, whether you are aware of it or whether you are taking advantage of it or not. So those are the kinds of things that you really need to assess before you start doing something, because if you don't know where the water's flowing and you go and you put a house down in a little bit of a gully, every time it rains, and you've got your driveway coming like this right in front, and every time it rains, it washes onto your driveway, and then your house is built kind of like an L, like the house that I live in. I didn't build it, and it's built like this, okay? And the L is facing uphill, and it's a brick house, so it's a concrete foundation or concrete footer. So it is a concrete dam, and so when it rains, our front walk, concrete sidewalk, nice, has about that much water on it, just with a 1-inch rain. So if it's raining, we've got to walk through that. So being aware of your energy flows through your property is one of the biggest things that will save you the most money. When I hit a client's location, that is the first thing I'm looking at is water, wind, and solar exposure. Those are the three big things. Water, wind, and solar exposure. I will routinely save a client 30 grand in 30 minutes. They'll say, this is what we're gonna do. What do you think about that? And I'll say, if you do this, this is gonna happen, which is gonna produce this result and this result. So I say all that to say, take some time observing your backyard. If it's just 100 square feet, take some time observing your backyard. There's a really cool app that I use a lot that is a wonderful little cheat. Really helps. So this is called Sunseeker, and it's like VR, okay? So I don't know if anyone can see this right here. There are lines overlaid. I'm looking through the camera, and it will show you, if you turn on location services, it'll get your location, where you are right when you're looking at it, and it'll show you the red line is the summer solstice. That is the highest in the sky that the sun is going to track, and it'll show you the track of that the sun. It shows you the green line is the spring and fall equinoxes, and then the blue line is the winter solstice, and then the yellow line is where it is currently, and it'll show you the times. And you might think, well, what good is that? If you have this and you crouch down in a spot that you're thinking about putting a garden bed or something like that, and you're looking through it, you can look and see which trees are going to be shading or allowing sun through. So you can find a spot. So if you're new to a location, you've never been there before, like I always am, I can find out, what does this spot right here look like in the winter? What does this spot look like in high summer? So I can look forward in time and see what is going to be happening right here without having to be on that site for a whole year and observe it and go out there and put out stakes or draw little sketches and map the solar track of everything. And that's a thing that's normally suggested people do with permaculture design on a new site, is just spend a year observing it. That's great, but we can use technology and kind of cheat and get some things done a lot sooner. So if you're in the South, so if you're below the Mason-Dixon line, you really should not put your garden in a spot that is going to get beat with sun all day long. Everyone always gets the general advice, it needs full sun. And so they say, all right, full sun. So I'm going to put it right smack dab out there in the middle of a field. It's going to get full sun. That's as it full can get. We want to supersize that sun, right? Most plants cannot photosynthesize after a certain temperature. There's an enzyme process that happens that allows the plants to create sugars. And those enzymes denature at a certain temperature. So pretty much, once those leaves get hotter than 80 degrees, it's almost done photosynthesizing for the day. So if it's 80 degrees outside and the sun's on it, those leaves are being actively cooled through transpiration, but they're going to slow down tremendously. So what we can infer from all this is that the only time that plant is at 100% peak photosynthesis is in the morning. So the best thing you can do for a garden is to put it where it'll get all the morning sun. So the first 3-4 hours of the day, that's when the plant is creating sugars. Pretty much the rest of the day, it's just trying to pump water and survive. That's all it's doing, is just sweating. And it grows at night. So be aware of that. Use something like Sunseeker or just observations, and you can look through it and you can find out, okay, we can take down these trees right here, because, crouch down, and we're looking through, and we can see there's a canopy that's going to stop the sun from getting to my plants in the morning. And if we scoot it this way a little bit, now we can catch the shade from 3 o'clock on, and then this spot can be shaded for the whole afternoon. That is going to be one of the biggest things you can do to have a lot more success with your garden. So if you're growing plants, shade in the afternoon. If you're in a more northern climate and you're getting longer daylight hours, then that's not really something you need to worry about. Put it in full sun. But I bet most people here are, Virginia, Mason-Dixon line, down south. There's some Yankees. Hi. So we hit solar exposure. Pay attention to your water flow. If we're talking about livestock, gardening, again, these are things that will greatly affect your happiness, your animal's happiness, and your success level. Most animals do not like to be wet all the time, so paying attention to those kinds of environmental things is a big help. Okay, structures. I want to talk about structures. Another thing that people really love to do is, well, I need a building for this, I need a building for that, and they'll just start tossing them out there. Well, that looks like a good spot. That spot's cleared over there. I can build something there. Maybe that's a good spot, maybe it's not. So if we've done this site assessment and we know where our patterns of traffic are going to be, is it easy to get power to that location? Is it easy to get water to that location? What am I going to have to do to get power and water to there? Those are things that you need to think about before you start building. Map it out. Write it down on a piece of paper. Draw it out. Just draw a little, crayon sketch. It doesn't have to be fancy. Just think about these things and think about how can I walk through an area to make it easier to do things in a sequential order. So, for instance, let's say you have your garden. We'll say our garden's here, and then our house is kind of over here, over where the fruit and fodder trees are. We'll just kind of use this as a makeshift map. What I want to do is I want to be able to hit these systems in my day-to-day maintenance so that I walk straight out to my garden. I pick the vegetables that need picked first thing in the morning. If there's a squash that's got some blossom end rot or something on it and we're not going to use it, that goes into a 5-gallon bucket. The good stuff goes into another 5-gallon bucket, or a smaller bucket if you're gardening on a smaller scale. If there's any weeds that need pulled out, those go into the trash bucket. And so I can collect all this stuff. I can then walk just a little bit, drop off my good stuff. And that can just sit there and wait. I take all my trash stuff with me. I dump it to the chickens in the chicken compost yard. And then I go take care of my rabbits. If there's rabbit manure I need to collect, that goes right into that trash bucket. And I can sequentially hit all of these systems piece by piece and not have to be walking back and forth. We don't want to touch things twice. In construction, when you touch things twice, you're spending money. And time is money. So for us, just backyard stuff, time is money. You don't want to be touching things multiple times every day. You want to be able to do it and be done. Because when you do that, you lean out your process, you make things more efficient, and you actually have time to do the important things or fix things. What happens to a lot of people is they get a lot of irons in the fire, and then they end up putting out fires every day. They're playing catch up all the time. So you don't want to get in a position where all you're doing is playing catch up and putting out fires, because then you never get ahead of yourself and you end up not being productive, and then you end up getting frustrated, and then you end up with animals dying or a garden dying, and then that makes you more frustrated, and then you have a bad day, and then you say, screw it, you throw in the towel, and then you quit.
You have a surveillance camera at my house?
No, it's just, I've lived it. I've done these things. I'm sure anyone who's ever done this is thinking, yep, I've been there. Yeah. So, thinking about those processes, and even just taking a step back, you know, I've gone through times where I've said, you know what, I got too much on my plate, I'm going to find someone for my dozen chickens because I don't have time for it right now. I've got too much going on, so I step back. You need to feel free to do that. Don't think you have to keep doing every single thing that you've started. Sometimes you might need to get rid of half of those things and then focus on one thing and do it well. Talking about gardening, again, with this do one thing and do it well. Lots of people will get their seed catalogs and they'll be infected with the gardening virus. And they start going through the seed catalog and circling everything. You know, like a kid when it's Christmas time, I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and oh man, I could make, what good things I can make with this and this and this. Oh, that'd be great with gumbo. We're gonna grow these things. And you start building this bigger and bigger and bigger garden plan, and you're spending money on seeds, and when you tie up those resources, then you have fewer resources to do other more important things. What I always suggest people do, especially when they're brand new to gardening, is even if they want lots of production, to start with a 4 foot by 4 foot raised bed. Because you can feasibly import all of the material and not have any fertility issues with decent compost or even just potting mix. You could buy potting mix for a 4 foot by 4 foot raised bed and not break the bank. You could buy a few plants from a big box store that are hybrid tomatoes and squash and whatever you eat normally. Just buy those plants. So often people get really into this and they say, you know what, I'm gonna do this uber organic, I'm gonna go beyond organic, I'm gonna get organic heirloom plants, which are fantastic by the way, I'm not knocking them. We're gonna get, you know, the best, I'm gonna make compost, so I'm gonna start sourcing all these materials, we're gonna get 12 different types of manures, and 10 different species of leaves to mix in this, and it's gonna be like biodynamic, amazing. Great. If you can do that, great. The people that can do that have been doing it for a long time. So if you're brand new, do not do that. You're going to spread yourself so thin and try and master all of these skills that are acquired over 20 years. For those really cool people who are doing those really cool things, they've been doing it for 20 to 50 years. That's why they can do it like that. Start small. Make yourself a 4 by 4 garden bed. Buy some potting mix. Put it in there. Buy some hybrid plants. You know why hybrid plants are easier? Why they're most often used in commercial operations? Is because they are more vigorous. They are more disease resistant. They are more resistant to insects. They produce bigger and more consistent fruit, so you get more yield. So let's do a little kind of comparison. Hybrid green beans, we'll just make up some numbers, are gonna make 10 units of green beans, okay? An heirloom might taste better, but it's going to be less disease resistant, and it's going to be less insect resistant. And you might get 7 units of production, or 5. It's not uncommon for them to produce half as much as a hybrid. especially a really improved hybrid. So you're getting half as much straight off the bat. Well, if you have a 90% failure rate with your production, that's what people call a black thumb. And if you set yourself up for lower production, lower production, lower production with all of these uber organic things, and then you end up with a couple errors that drop your production rate down, all of a sudden I get nothing. I get $20 handful of green beans for the whole season, and I just invested like 200 hours into this handful of green beans. That's when people get really frustrated. So people that have taken my advice and have gotten the hybrid plants, and they invested $3 into some hybrid plants that someone else started the seeds, which is a whole skill curve. Someone else grew those plants, someone else fertilized those plants, and all you do is this, put it in there, and they start growing. There are great options for organic fertilizers that are already pre-mixed, they're standardized, they're great. Dr. Earth stuff. What's the other one? Garrett Juice. There's lots.
TSP.com gardening.
Yep, there's lots of great options there for very good fertilizers, so you don't have to use the Blue Miracle Grow stuff. If you don't have access to the better organic fertilizer stuff, don't feel like you have to use the good organic stuff. Just get some generic blue synthetic fertilizer and just grow the plants. This is what so many people overlook, is they think because I'm growing it in my backyard, I need to do it better than what I get at the grocery store. I promise, if you use the exact same awful chemicals, pesticides and fungicides and synthetic fertilizers, and you grow it in your backyard with those things, you're going to use less. You're going to grow a healthier plant, and you're going to pick that fruit when it is ripe, not underripe, and it won't be ripened with ethylene gas in a big, huge cargo shipping container with all the other tomatoes, and then shipped 2,000 miles, and then stocked, and then finally you're getting it, and the Brix level, the sugar levels in that vegetable are nothing compared to what you're going to be picking in your backyard. It's going to be, the fruit, the vegetables will be so much more alive and nutritionally beneficial to you, even if you use the synthetics. So, don't be afraid of doing things the subpar way when you're learning how to do that, because you will set yourself up for more success, and you're going to be encouraged, and you're going to learn those other support skills that will enable you to get better and better at your gardening and food production, and then eventually you can be that beyond organic, biodynamic, really cool, I've sourced 20 different types of manures from all over my region, and I make this amazing compost. That's wonderful. You can get there. Don't expect to be there on day one, because you'll get burnt out. So small animals are, in my opinion, kind of the backbone of any home food production system. Small animals will help you recycle plant matter and turn it into your fertilizer needs. They are completely essential to any ecosystem. So what you're thinking about here is, this is an ecosystem. We can't divorce a garden from an ecosystem. And we're thinking about holistic design here. So how can I recycle these things, and how can I make every component support the next? So be thinking about what you like to eat. Do you like rabbit? If you don't like to eat rabbit, maybe you shouldn't raise rabbits. So before you invest hundreds of dollars in infrastructure for rabbits and buy super cool breeding stock from Virginia, find out if you like rabbits. My wife does not like to eat rabbits, so that means she does not like to cook rabbits. There is a place for having an animal that will process plant matter and turn it into fertility, even if you don't like to eat them, okay, which I'm going to get into. Right. If you like to eat poultry, a small animal that is wonderful for that would be quail. Now, it's harder to feed quail independent of outside food inputs, which I always try to design things so that if the stink ever did hit the fan, I could continue my production. And that's what this is all about, which I'll get into in a second. This is really, really stinking cool. So I always try to think, how can I continue to take care of these animals if I was not able to get food from the box store, And that's a preparedness thing. How can I make sure that my dogs and cats or whatever are fed if there's a food shortage, or there's road closures, or something happens to the shipping industry or the trucking industry, and hey, I can't buy dog food. What is my exit strategy? What's my out? So try and think about those ways to design in resiliency. So I always like to look for income streams, because every time that I can take a waste product, or I can invest 10% more effort to get 100% more profitability, that's always something that's going to be beneficial. I can make the hobby pay for itself. And every time you can do that, now you free up your capital to do something else. You freed, if I've got $100 tied up in this, in my budget every month, $100 is going out every month. Boom, boom, $100. If I can make that bring in $100, now all of that is free. So if I'm getting meat out of that, I'm getting free meat, not including my time. If I can even make that bring in $150, now I'm getting paid for my time, and now it is really free food. And if you were to put that on a spreadsheet and compare what it would cost you to buy that, it's going to be even more valuable than if you were buying it from, let's say, a box store. So be thinking about that. When you're looking at your vegetables that you're getting out of your garden, you think, well, I could buy those tomatoes from the store for 20 cents. You couldn't buy those tomatoes. You could buy tomatoes, but not those. So don't forget to make that a consideration when you're doing your cost-benefit analysis and thinking through those things. Is it worth it to get these tomatoes? Is it worth it to get this produce? Is it worth it to get this, this rabbit meat or whatever? Always be thinking about, what is the real value in what you're creating. So let's talk about this real quick. I kept running into the same question over the years and years I've been doing consulting of how could I produce almost a completely recyclable food production system? How could I eliminate the energy leaving my system? So, we're talking about energy flowing into your property. That's your system. That's your our sphere of influence. versus your sphere of concern, So this is my sphere of influence, this property inside these boundaries. This is the system that I'm working with, and there are little subsystems all throughout it. And we want them all to work harmoniously to support one another, right? And we want the waste stream from this to build this other system so that we are losing as little energy as possible. I look at money as embodied energy. It is a symbol of embodied energy. If I trade my time and effort for some greenbacks, that is a symbol of my embodied energy. We can trade that, we can give it away, or we can retain it. So when we're building wealth in a bank account, what needs to happen? More needs to go in than goes out, right? Or else it goes negative, and then we owe money. So we want to be building wealth in our system, okay? We can think about it as solar energy and embodied energy. In my mind, the only way to truly build wealth is not with an extractive process like mining, although I don't have any problem with that, is through photosynthetic processes. That's the only real way to build something on this planet because we're getting energy from an outside input. We can actually we can capture those photons and make more stuff here. We can capture it and lock it up. We can build soil. So that will build real wealth. So we want to think about how can we capture that solar energy and how can we convert it into energy that we can use. You can do that with a solar bank and utilize the electrons for running our lights and stuff. And so we don't have to pay money to an outside power company. Or we can invest in fruit and fodder trees. And we can put fruit and fodder trees around our property that will direct the wind input onto our property, that will capture the solar input, that will capture and utilize the water input, and that will start building fertility and capturing and retaining energy, dollar bills on our property. Those fodder trees. So I've got a legend over here. We have outputs from each of these things and inputs. And I try to keep this as simple as possible. I could have made this way, way more complicated and more inclusive of everything. But I tried to keep it as simple as possible. We got food, we have profit, we have resource, we have fertility. So we can exchange something like some of the rabbits, and we can sell them and bring energy, embodied energy in the form of currency, into our system by selling pets. Our fruit and fodder trees, they can produce food for us in the form of fruit. They can produce a resource in the form of leaves. Well, we can take those leaves from those fodder trees and we can just strip them off into a bucket or a bin or whatever. Just cut that little those branches off of our coppiced or pollarded mulberry trees, and we get a whole bunch of those limbs, and we just carry them over to where our rabbits are. We set them down, and we just strip the leaves off. Strip the leaves off. You could snip the tips off, have the ends of the mulberry branches. Rabbits will love eating those sticks, and that gives them something to do. They won't be as bored. They'll be happier. They'll be healthier. Mulberry leaves generally are between 28 and 10% protein. Most rabbit food is like 16% protein, I think. So it's free food. So we harvest those leaves, we feed them to our rabbits. What do rabbits put out? Well, you can harvest them as meat. You can harvest from the rabbits pets. What we're talking about, if you don't like to eat rabbit meat, that doesn't mean you have to raise meat rabbits. You could raise Rex Lop bunnies or whatever and sell them as pets. You could raise California giant rabbits or whatever to sell to 4-H kids, because they buy them and they raise them up, and then I don't know what they do with them. But there's a market there, and it's a pretty good market. So don't think about any one of these systems as producing one thing, because they all produce multiple things. And if you just have the right mindset, you can find a use for each of those outputs. There's no such thing as trash, it's only treasure. So think about how you can turn that trash into treasure. And for me, the biggest treasure from the rabbits is not meat, it's not money, it's the manure. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to capture that solar energy, and I'm trying to turn it into energy that I can utilize. So we're capturing that solar energy, we're converting it into food, and we're converting the waste, so it's a fertility component, and we can set the rabbits up to be suspended from the ceiling with pulleys and some cords, so the cages can be raised and lowered, okay? And we can drop those cages down inside a high-sided earthworm bin. And the earthworm bin can be lined in EPDM pond liner, so it's completely waterproof. And those rabbit cages go into it about that far, so that when the rabbits go over to the corner, to the edge, to pee, they're not going to be peeing and it running down the outside of your earthworm bin and making it disgusting. We don't want that urine to be where we can't utilize it. We want that urine to go into our nutrient recycling system. So the rabbits poop and they pee directly into, ding, 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 our earthworm bins. I don't have to handle rabbit manure. I don't have to compost rabbit manure. You know who doesn't like turning compost piles? This guy. I don't like to have to handle that. I want the earthworms to be happy and healthy, and I want those earthworms to do it all for me. So in the earthworm bin, they're getting fed automatically. Now I might need to moderate what is going on in that earthworm bin, so I might need to add some sawdust or add some decomposing leaves to change the inputs into this earthworm bin and regulate it. So I might raise the rabbit bin up and, dig around in there and see, is it too wet? If it is, let's add some more dry material. Is it too nitrogenous? There's too much urine in it. Let's add some carbon material in there to keep them healthy so that they can do their job and provide fertility for us. But we have outputs from the earthworm bin, right? We got trash. We got all that effluent that's going to be draining out the drain hole. And that's going to just drain on the ground. Or we can plumb it up, and all of the juice from the earthworm bins can go to a reservoir, like a 5-gallon bucket. It could be a 1-gallon plastic bucket, if it's a small system. It could be a 1,500-gallon poly tank, if it's a very large system. And that poly tank could have an aerator in it, and it could have an automatic float valve in it to keep it topped off with water. So the worm juice is going into here, it's getting aerated, so it's aerobic bacteria, and we're making compost tea that we don't have to make compost to get. And we can set this, our garden and our fruit and fodder trees to be irrigated automatically with a little bit of this injected into the water system. There's a device called a Venturi siphon. It's a really old technology. And basically, imagine you've got a pipe and you've got an outside input into the pipe, and it's like a straw, okay? When it goes into the pipe and water flows past the outside of the pipe, it creates a low pressure spot right there. There's a little vortex that's created right there, and it creates a vacuum. And it pulls whatever's in that tube into the line. And so they make them normally, I think it's 1:16 ratio. You can get them off the shelf for like $6. Little brass fitting, and it's got a black tube. You could have that sit in a little bucket and it'll just suck whatever is in that bucket out and into your water line. So I can automatically fertilize my garden every time the water clicks on with worm juice. That means I don't have to spend the time collecting the worm juice, measuring it out, putting it in a bucket, filling a pitcher to water my plants. I just saved myself hundreds of hours by just being thoughtful and setting this up to do it for me. If I leave for 2 weeks, do I have to worry about, is my garden watered properly? Nope. Because I set it up to do it for me. We also have earthworm castings. That's solid gold. I would does anyone have earthworms? Here, okay? Do y'all have rabbits also? Okay. What would you rather use to fertilize your garden? Earthworm castings or raw manure or compost? For me, it's earthworm castings every time because I don't have to do nearly as much work, and I just have a little plastic shot glass thing with earthworm castings in it. Pull the mulch back, I drop that right where I'm going to put seeds, kind of push it down, drop my seeds on there, put a little bit of mulch on it, and I'm done. Once you have decently fertile soil, if you do that every time you plant, you pretty much don't have to fertilize at all. So the castings can be harvested and put in our garden. There's going to be a point when your garden is so fertile, if you're doing this system, you will reach peak fertility, and any more inputs will be detrimental. You will have a garden that is so fertile, you will have to stop fertilizing it. Okay? It happens. And then what are you going to do with all those fertility amendments? Oh no, they're trash again. Are they trash? Or can we sell that solid gold for money and use it to invest in some other venture, some other system on the property? If you just have so much fertility on your property that you can't use earthworm castings anywhere for like your fruit and fodder trees, you just turn that whole output, almost the whole output, for the rest of the life of the system into money coming into your property. Money coming in, money coming in, money coming in. You're building wealth and resiliency. We can sell those earthworms as bait. We can sell worm colonies. There have been multiple years when I've tried to buy red wiggler starter colonies, and they're sold out. Can't find them anywhere online. Do you know what that tells me? That tells me that the market is not satisfied. That means there's money to be made. So, be paying attention to those things. Just because we have too many earthworms, don't just toss them in your compost pile, because they're not going to be happy with there. Sell them to someone for 20, 30, 40 bucks. So, one of the big important components of this system is the chicken compost yard. I really like chickens because they do a lot of work for me. If you don't like the noise, don't keep a rooster. You don't need a rooster unless you're hatching eggs. If you're protecting the hens, they don't need a rooster. They'll be happier with one, but it's not expressly necessary. They will do a lot of work for you, and you can feed them for free on a household's waste stream. For us, when we had chickens, because we don't right now, everything that could turn into dirt somehow went into a bucket in our kitchen. Everything. When we cooked bacon in our cast iron skillet and we wiped out the skillet, that bacon grease paper towel went into the bucket. Are the chickens going to eat it? Nope. But it can turn into dirt. And I can make that into compost instead of putting it in a landfill. And that means that paper towel costs me money. That's embodied energy. I would rather retain that money. I'm going to keep that in my pocket, right? We're going to keep that in our system. So everything would go to the chicken compost yard. We would take it, let's say I got tired and I didn't finish my beer. Sacrilege. but that goes in the bucket. We got some leftovers that we didn't eat in the fridge. Normally people put them in the trash can, they go outside, and they get dumped into the chicken bucket. If the chickens don't want to eat it, they won't. That all goes into the compost yard that is covered. Don't make your compost yard uncovered because you don't want it getting rained on. You want to regulate how much moisture is in that yard. All that goes into like a rubber tote, you know, those like hog feed pans. So it's low enough the chickens can get into it and get to it. They'll scratch through it all. The next day, it'll just be gray sludge. Dump it out onto the mulch. The mulch can be wood chips, can be weeds, can be brush, can be hay, can be straw. Anything that can decompose can go in there. Rough stuff. Harvey Ussery from, what is that, Backyard Chickens or something, popularized this chicken composting yard not too long ago, 15 years ago. But everything that can turn into dirt goes into there. The chickens process it. There are lots of mycelial interactions happening. They'll scratch through, they'll pick out those mycelial threads and eat them like, you know, spaghetti noodles. Everything is being decomposed in there. All of that waste stream all that money that I paid out to acquire something that we can turn into dirt is being retained. I don't want to throw money away. So that all goes to here. Once the garden is sufficiently fertile, this waste stream processing center, which is what it is, you're not going to ever stop having that waste stream. Now all it is a fertility production system. If we have so much we don't need it for our fruit and fodder trees, which I don't think you would ever have so much compost, you couldn't use it all. I've never had that problem. But eventually, it is conceivable, especially on a smaller lot. You know, if you had 2 acres and you had a bunch of chickens and you're producing tons of stuff and you're getting, you know, outside mulch inputs, you can have so much that you don't need all the compost. Now you can turn it into cash by selling it to people who do need it. Or you could bless someone and make their life better by showing up with a truckload of beautiful compost, and you can build them a garden bed and you can get them started. You can help build resiliency in your neighbors and in your community. And now you're building a stronger community, you're building relationships, you're building social capital. Those are all wonderful things to do. You could just help someone. So that's a way we can retain that money and make it into something useful. So the garden, we have outputs, veggies, we have the weeds and the vegetables that are garbage. That all goes back to here, gets processed into compost, and we have our compost, and I have 2 different thicknesses of lines here because it doesn't take long before this garden is so fertile, you don't need the compost, you might just need a little bit of compost because you want a more varied nutrient profile going into your garden than just earthworm castings. But most of that's going to be going to your fruit and fodder trees. This is the backbone of the whole system. Without this, it all falls apart. So if you can get that set up first, then all of this comes very easy. So what really kicked this whole idea off to me was I had a relatively wealthy client who was concerned about the end of the world as we know it. It's all going to collapse, and it's going to collapse like this. He's very convinced.
Wonder where you found him.
and it's all going to hit the fan, and I'm going to need to bug out. And I've got my super Mylar packed seed bank. He's never gardened before, and he's going to grow all the food for him, his immediate family, and also extended family. And it's just trees and grass, and he's got a tractor to till it and everything, and that's going to work. And I said, no, that's not going to work. So we need to come up with a solution that is going to set you up for success. So let's do a hypothetical situation.
About 5 minutes.
Okay, awesome, perfect. So let's say we've got a bug out location, right? It's out in the hills. How can we set this up so that if we needed to, let's say it wasn't the end of the world, it was the end of our world as we know it. It was family problems, a job loss, the end of your world. And you had to bug out. You had to fall back to a fallback position. If you had your fruit and fodder trees growing in place, they're already doing their thing, they're just getting stronger, they're just getting more productive as the years progress. You might need to go up there once a year and prune them back to the ground and just take that material, run it through a wood chipper, and make mulch. Where could the mulch go? The mulch could go to your garden site. So you've already done your site assessment, you figured out where it's going to be the best location, you can get water to it, your structures will all work good. That garden spot can just be building fertility. I had a client years and years ago, a dentist, and he had been struggling with a garden, and he got this huge 30-yard truckload of wood chips brought to his location. And he didn't want a big pile because his wife thought it would be ugly. And so he had them spread it out about a foot thick. And then he would just go out there and he would harvest some of those wood chips and move them over to his garden spot. And he'd, put down that much wood chips for his garden. And he said he just had problems and problems and problems with his garden. Could never keep it moist and fertility problems, and it just wasn't working. And we're walking along and 3 months no rain. The clay is all cracked. We're looking at cracks, grasshoppers flying off all over the place, weeds growing all over the place. The grass is brown because it's so dry. And he's like, man, look at my garden spot. And we looked at his garden spot. It looked exactly the same. Okay? And I said, man, you just need to mulch it more. Well, I've mulched it a lot. No, you haven't, because there's no mulch there. So you're not mulching it. Oh, yeah, I'm mulching it. Okay. Well, if you're mulching it properly, you'd be able to, right now, just shove pull the mulch back and just shove your hand into the soil about like that, even with this kind of heavy clay that you have. No, that's not possible. I promise it's possible. So I looked over there, and I hadn't been over to the big mulch pile, so I didn't really know firsthand what it looked like under there. And I told him, I'll bet you $250. Yeah, if we go up there, I can pull that back, and I can do that. He's like, nope. I said, all right, you're going to bet? I know you're already paying me to come out here and help you, but I'll just knock $250 off of what you owe me. And he thought for a second. He's like, no, I don't believe you, but I'm not taking that bet. So we walked up there, and he said, no, it's going to be just as dry underneath there. We pulled it back. Earthworms started just flopping out. And I stuck my hand down to it and went and pulled out this beautiful black, awesome soil. Earthworms were just coming out in between my fingers. Like 20 of them dropped from that one handful of soil. I said, this is all you have to do. And so the next year, that's where his garden was. So you can be preparing that location years in advance. And then the moment you are ready to garden, all you have to do is just pull back the mulch, stick a seed in, lightly cover the seed, and it will grow. So you can set your system up. You can have your rabbit cages already built, ready to go. You can have automated watering, kind of set aside, ready to go, all the components with a gravity feed system. So it's, end of the world proof. It's really simple. I like simple solutions. So you could have all that ready to go, and you could just make a contact with someone local who has rabbits. So at the drop of a hat, you could say, and you could even budget for it. You could have money in an envelope, cash in an envelope. You could have a predetermined price for a couple breeding pairs. Money's right there. End of the world for you or for the region, for the world happens. Boom, here's your cash, give me my rabbits. And then boom, we got fruit and fodder trees, rabbits set up. You got your earthworm bins already built. maybe there's not worms in it, but they're not too hard to find.
Might be under your mulch.
They might be under your mulch, or you might be able to just go down and get a bait cup and start with a small earthworm bin and just grow them out from there. The chicken compost yard, all you need is the infrastructure in place, and then all you have to do is acquire the birds. Automated fertigation, again, those are pretty simple to set up. The garden, again, we can be building the soil, prepping it, and then this can all be almost completely set up with maybe once a year maintenance. So it's completely up to you how big and intense you want this kind of a system. You can scale this down to work in an apartment building. You can grow the fruit and fodder trees outside in your margins. There are fodder trees that you can just harvest that are just growing wild. Mulberries grow almost completely across everywhere in the US, and you just need a pair of pruners. So, how much time do I have for questions?
We've got about 15. We can push it to 20.
Okay.
So we'll dive in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go around with the mic and grab people. Remember, ask him your question, and then he'll ask you detail.
How do you separate your earthworms from your castings?
That's simple. You just put a heat lamp or a bright light on one section and keep thinning it down. The earthworms go away from heat and light, so you just keep shining it at the side. Once you get a corner, and you just keep raking it away, and you just keep raking it away until all the earthworms are just running to the one side. You can also, pull it off to one side, put some fresh bedding in one side, and then put some food over there like cornmeal, wheat flour, something like that. That's a really easy source of food for them, and they'll kind of flock over to it.
Okay. It's also fun to learn that you can put in infrastructure before you get chickens. That was what I took out of your presentation.
It's always good to get the infrastructure first and then the animals. So get good electric fence put up and good perimeter fence put up before you get goats. Go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I enjoy lots of fires where I burn a lot of wood. Where do you put the ashes for that? Where's the best place to utilize that resource?
Without knowing the quantities, because you can put too much ash into your compost systems. If you're heating with wood, you don't want to put all of your ashes into your chicken compost yard. If you're having a campfire periodically, or you're grilling with some good lump charcoal and you don't know what to do with that, just sprinkle it in your chicken compost yard. That's what I would do.
Okay.
You mentioned the EPDM liner in the worm bin. Do you have designs or do you have a spigot built into that design to capture the leachate?
Yeah, so what you would do is the bottom of your worm bin, you would want to build it so that it's slanted, so you're not slanting the whole structure, because it needs to be square and true for your rabbit cage to fall down in it. So you just build a floor that was canted to one end, and then get a bulkhead fitting, like you'd use for aquaponics. You pop that bulkhead fitting in there. I would put a couple different mesh sizes to exclude the earthworm bedding material, so that you kind of have a dome. You could just get some cheap colanders and just flop a cheap colander over top of it, a plastic colander. Drill some extra holes in it, maybe put some fiberglass window screen over top of it. You'll get some earthworms in there. It's not a big deal. They'll turn into earthworm goo in the liquid. But the main thing is to just keep all the soil out.
Okay, Jake, I saw your hand up. Are you sure you're ready for your one question?
I'll get two, don't
You only get one. Is it short?
Yeah.
Just give them the mic.
Yeah.
But your rich guy, he didn't count the I am Negan factor in there too.
Is that a question?
No. Here's a question. How big is your earthworm earthworm bin, how much tea does it produce, and how much can you dilute that tea and still get an impact? That's all.
So, man, your earthworm bin could be the size of this structure.
How big is yours and how much tea does it produce? You know that, right?
It's a 4 foot by 7 foot. The amount of tea it produces depends on the weather. You know, it depends on how much moisture is going into there, how much moisture is evaporating. So I can't really answer how much it produces because it always depends. No, I wouldn't say well, it depends on how much time. So over the course of a month, maybe a couple gallons. But I live in during the summer it's really dry, and so I actually have to moisten the earthworm bedding to keep it at a good moisture level. So
Dilution aspect, a gallon of tea.
I don't.
Are you gonna shoot him?
I don't worry about diluting it. I just it all goes into the drum.
Okay.
And it gets automatically topped off with water. So I don't know the dilution rate.
Cool.
I don't care
Okay.
because that's all happening automated.
Sure.
So I don't care how much is going in there. It just gets diluted automatically.
Okay. You're up. Okay, well, hold on.
Oh, I can talk loud.
Yes.
Nick, I was wondering, you mentioned in the compost that you put meat and
Mhm.
poop, and so,
I don't put human manure in there.
okay, what about dog manure?
I don't do that.
Okay.
I don't put
and-
any canine manures in
Okay,
there.
but meat and proteins are okay in your compost, okay.
Well, the chickens eat it. The
Okay.
if there's any meat
Now,
like
we
on
were just doing like a drum system,
Okay, I'm glad you brought up the drum system.
okay.
I love composting systems. There is a spectrum of good to worst. And the best composting system is the one where I don't have to do the work. The chickens will. This is a non-thermophilic process. If you want thermophilic compost, the hot compost, because you're processing weed seeds or pathogens, you want that to get up to 160 degrees. 9 times out of 10, the drums do not get hot enough. Most of the time, there is not enough volume. You would have to have a large drum. Most of those drums are about this big around. You can't get a yard in there. And you need like a cubic yard to get the volume, to get the heat. Because the heat is a byproduct of the metabolism of all the bacteria. So the bacteria are eating things, they're metabolizing, and their waste heat is what heats it up. And their waste heat is what shifts it into that thermophilic bacteria range where all of the pathogenic organisms can't survive. It's like when your body has, a fever, it gets hot to kill off the pathogens. So I do not like the drums. What I like instead is in this chicken compost yard, I like to get, everyone's familiar with cattle panels, right? Cattle panels, they have the big squares, and then they're graduated spacing down to smaller squares, rectangles like this at the bottom. I hate cattle panels for this. I like horse panels. And the horse panels are 2" by 4", and they're vertical spacings, vertical openings. You take that horse panel, where I live, they're about $60, $70, and you fold it into a cylinder, you overlap 2 feet, and you get U-bolts. It's a U-bolt, and there's threaded here and threaded here, and then a little fitting that fits over here, and you just put the nuts on it, and you can clamp it all together. I put about 6 of those U-bolts on there. So you clamp this and this, because they're overlapping, and you'll get about a 4 foot by 5 foot tall. You can chop it off if you need it shorter, but you'll end up with this cage that's really rigid and strong. And if you put about 4 attachment points on there with aircraft cabling or rope or whatever up to a single point to a pulley, you might need like a block and tackle if there's a lot of volume in there. But you can put it in your chicken compost yard. It's attached up to the rafters down, and what you do is you take all that compost material, you toss it in there. If you have a dead animal, get it built up about 2 foot. If you have another 2 foot to put on top of it, You toss your dead animal right in the center, and you put your compost on it. And it heats up, it gets nice and hot. You can compost a coyote in there.
I saw Salatin at his level that they do it.
Yeah.
A cow.
Yeah, you absolutely. You can compost an elephant if you have a big enough pile.
Stuff, but
Yep.
a cow.
So you fill that cage up, and then once it gets hot enough that you need to turn it, well, you don't use a fork to turn it. You just lift the cage off, everything falls out. You set the cage down right next to it. The chickens come in, they scratch through it all. What do chickens like to do? Flatten things out. When you have a nice mulched berm, what are they going to do? They're going to scratch all the mulch off of it and make it all flat. They scratch everything downhill. So what they'll do is they'll take that whole pile and they'll scratch it into a shorter pile, and then you just take that material, put it back in there, regulate the moisture if you need to wet it down, and then you can do a hot compost process, and then they've done a little bit more than half of the work for you. So that's the way I like to do hot compost. Only do it when you have enough. You're baking a cake.
My question is, what do you do about squash vine borers and squash beetles on your awesome yellow summer squash?
I've never had squash vine borers. I grow in a forest, and I grow intensively in small spaces, and they've never found me. I don't know how to combat them. I would probably go with keeping a couple syringes with a BT solution. I don't know if that would work. No?
Losing battle.
Losing battle? I would probably just transition away from summer squash in a system like that to growing summer squash more intensively. Probably growing summer squash more intensively in a completely netted enclosure. So a wicking bed. Guys, if you're starting out and you have it in the budget to build a single wicking bed for your first garden, you will be so happy because you will have so few of the typical problems that it'll just help you achieve success so much more if you start with something like that. You don't have to worry about moisture levels, you don't have to worry about weeds, and half of the disease problems just disappear.
You talked about peak fertility for a garden and it'd be detrimental with more fertilizer.
Yes.
What? Question mark.
So there is there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. When you get those nutrients in proportions that are too far out of whack, then what'll happen is, even though the nutrient is there, it will be not bioavailable to the plants. So you might have plenty of phosphorus or plenty of calcium, but if the pH is off too much, or if there's too much of another element, then it will kind of chemically lock up that other element. And even though you get your soil test, and it's like, soil test says I got plenty of calcium, but I'm experiencing blossom end rot. Well, if you follow your feed, then the plants get the calcium they need, but there's plenty in the soil, so what's the problem? The problem normally is there's too much magnesium in the soil, and there's too much of an imbalance, or there's a pH issue. So you can get soil that is too fertile. So if you're gardening and you're going to be gardening in the ground, always get a soil test. Don't just assume that throwing fertility at it is going to be the best thing. So yes, you can get too much fertility, too much nitrogen. Yep, the leaves will like curl and it'll hurt the plants.
Nick, is there any herbivore alternatives on the small scale to the rabbit? That's the first question.
Sure. If you were in Ecuador, then you could have a wonderful, delicious delicacy called cuy. I had cuy when I went to Ecuador, and that's a thing that you could grow or breed in cages, very similar to rabbits. Those are guinea pigs.
Do they make good shish kebabs?
Sure. I'm trying to think of other smaller herbivores.
On the herbivore side, we got lots of omnivores with the poultry and everything, but
Right.
herbivore side.
Rabbits always spring to mind. Can anyone else think of something?
Give nothing.
Oh, miniature goats are awful.
What about groundhogs?
Maybe. I've never seen a domestic groundhog. Drop bears?
Something to try.
Koala bear? I don't know. Good question.
So with that, one of the biggest, I think, entries, or at least I've seen, it was in our family too, that's why we stopped raising rabbits, is slaughter for the rabbits. That's what turns people off from that piece. Like a quail, no big deal. Some of the other things, no big deal. Rabbits. Is there a way you've helped anyone get around that? I mean, I know we all kind of have a propensity for it. But.
Pushing through it. So the rabbits. This is what I do. Whether anyone has a problem with it or not, I don't know and I don't care. The rabbit lives a great life. When it's time to go, they get set on the ground, and I have a tool rod, like a rake handle or a hoe, and that goes right across the neck. I'm stepping on one end about a foot away from the rabbit's neck because I don't want to put so much pressure that they're gonna freak out. When you hold them really well, they hold still, and then when that pressure is put on their neck, they're just held down. They hold still, and then I gently come up vertical, so their neck is flat on the ground and their body is vertical, and then I step on the other, and I'm holding their back legs, and you just sharply and quickly pop up, cervical dislocation. They're pretty much dead at that point. 5-10 seconds later, there's nothing happening. And then I proceed with gutting and skinning. I can, when I was doing rabbits consistently, I would be able to take the rabbit out of the cage and have it in a cooler, clean, in a minute, minute and a half, clean. Because, skinning is, like 10 seconds, and then gutting is 4 seconds. And then I just have some big shears. So I just pull the skin up to the head, shear, snip. I pull the skin up to the feet, snip, 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 tail, snip, and then hose it off, boom, in the cooler.
Yeah, they make a commercial product that does that same type of physics that you're doing on the ground.
Yep.
I haven't used one yet, but
I'm learning you should move near Nick if you don't want to process your rabbits. Yeah, you can pay somebody too. That's we got next question.
Is it practical to use a pond to irrigate a garden if it's close enough?
Sure. The main thing that you will run into if the pond is lower in elevation than your garden is the power and reliability of pumping every time you need water. So I live on a 1,300 acre reservoir, so I have all the water I could want. So my plan for using that water, because I don't want to pump water out of a well, I want to quickly and cheaply get water into a storage tank. So my plan is to have a 3,000 gallon poly tank uphill upgrade of my garden and a 2-inch water line running to that, and I'm just going to have a semi-trash pump that I'll fill it up with fuel, I'll click it on, and I'll just let it run until it goes dry. And that fills up that poly tank as much as I can, The next day, if it's not full, do it again till it's full, and then I can gravity feed everything from there if I need to. If I need higher pressure to push out from sprinkler heads or to push out through, emitters that are in-ground, which I really like the in-ground emitters. They make the poly tube with like copper plates, so it's root barrier, so it doesn't get clogged up with roots. You can put that under your mulch. You never have to worry about your sprinkler heads making messes. You don't have to worry about water droplets splashing, pathogens up on the leaves. It's all underground, which is really nice. So if you need something like that, you need pressure for it, then you can really cheaply and easily put in a something like an RV water pump. It pressurizes the line to whatever the set, maybe it's like 60 psi, and it's DC powered, so you could conceivably have a solar panel and a couple little batteries out there to just click that thing on whenever it needed it.
Okay, we've got the last question here, and I've seen a few other hands up, so I encourage those of you who didn't get your question in to just pile on Nick when we cancel this session.
Say you live in Texas and you don't have a place that has shade for your garden and it's going to get more than 3 or 4 hours. What's your next alternative and best?
My next alternative would be to put up a superstructure that I could attach shade cloth to. You're going to want to really think about wind in this situation. If you have prevailing winds, I would want that shade cloth coming down on the prevailing wind side and extending over so that you're getting as much of that afternoon shade as possible. I'd probably be looking at least 60% shade cloth, maybe 70. You might just have to kind of play around with that and see how your plants do. But if they're getting good morning sun, then you shouldn't have much of an issue with them getting too much shade, especially in the afternoon, because it just, once it gets 90 degrees outside ambient temperature, they're not doing a whole lot of photosynthetic activity anyways.
Awesome, Nick, thank you. Good job as always. I learned a lot from you.